70% of butterflies have disappeared in the last 50 years, and we're going through a complete biodiversity collapse.
What the fuck?
But with a little bit of hope and inspiration, this is still reversible. Astrid tells us how. Hi everyone, and welcome back to our podcast, What the Field, where Christina and I basically choose interesting people that we want to chat to and use the podcast as an excuse to do so. For those of you who don't know us, CrowdFarming connects organic and regenerative farmers to conscious consumers all across Europe. So Astrid, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like we have so much to talk about. You've participated in so many amazing projects. You founded Inspiration for Action. You're part of the founders of the Alvelal project. You've written books. You've received awards. There's just so much that we have to cover in this time. Why don't we start with the very beginning? First of all, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, great. And why don't we start off in kind of the early days? What got you into this space? I know you did a PhD in conservation biology. What made you make those choices at a young age or when you were younger?
Well, my passion since I was a child has been animals and then biodiversity as an adolescent. So I pursued a career in conservation biology and have worked for many, many years in the recovery of critically endangered species like the black-footed ferret, the Iberian lynx, and in Madagascar with the golden crowned sifaka. But at some point, I realized that a species at a time, it wasn't going to get us very far, that we needed to look at the whole system as a whole, at the ecosystem. So I became interested in ecosystem restoration. I started to work with the Tompkins, Doug and Chris Tompkins, who create national parks and do a lot of species recovery in Chile and Argentina, and have together been able to establish more than 21 national parks, altogether the size of Netherlands and Belgium combined. And then I ran into Common Land, and Common Land is an association, I was a foundation that comes with a very wonderful model, and it's the 4 returns, 3 zones, 20 years. And I was really attracted to the first return, which is return on inspiration. So that's what got me into agriculture. Actually, what got me into agriculture was more Doug Tompkins that said, if we need to preserve biodiversity, we really need to change the world we do agriculture. And, I had always been working in biodiversity, but I had never given such deep thought to agriculture. So I think that's how I got there. It's like, okay, we really need to understand what are we doing in our agriculture and what can we do to preserve biodiversity through agriculture.
Yeah, that's so true that they don't overlap so much or they do more now, but at a time agriculture was so isolated from all of the other conservation movements. So after all of this part of focusing on the recovery of these endangered mammals and common ground and everything, you founded Inspiration for Action. Is that right? Is that kind of also because that's in line with the first 4 returns of common land? Is that what inspired you to create Inspiration for Action?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So first came actually starting to work with Common Land, which at the time was Ecosystem Return Foundation back then in 2013. And they wanted to set up places in the world to practice the model, to actually see how the model of the 4 returns, 3 zones, 20 years works. Maybe I should explain what the model is about. And it's a framework. And the 4 returns, it's inspiration, social capital, natural capital, and return on investment. We tend to think about return on investment as the main thing, but Common Land came with a bolder idea. It's like, we need to inspire people. If we don't work on inspiration as a unique thing, not as a default thing, then that's how we can work on landscape restoration. So the main thing is that we're not talking only about agriculture, we are talking about restoring landscapes at a very large scale using agriculture and mainly regenerative agriculture as a restoration tool. So the return on inspiration is about giving hope. And that's so important. We need to be positive and keep each other, happy and hopeful. And return on social capital is about creating jobs and capacity building. Return on natural capital has to do with restoring soils, harvesting water, especially in desertified areas like many areas in Spain or in the Mediterranean basin or in many areas in the world are becoming desertified. So how to deal with water is a huge issue. And recovering biodiversity. And that, of course, is the love of my heart. So it's like the diversity of life on Earth, that it's really becoming shattered and we don't talk enough about it. So in the 4 returns, biodiversity is an important thing. And finally is the return on investment. How do we do this as a business? So it's sustainable over the long period. So we are not putting our hands for subsidies or philanthropy, but we are empowering farmers to create their own businesses and to form networks that make them stronger. So the 4 returns are practiced in 3 zones. So you have a natural zone, which is where biodiversity comes from. And you need to work on those natural zones because it's the source of your biodiversity. Then the mixed zone is where you do agriculture, silviculture, and farming. So agro-silvopastoral is the mixed zone. It's where you implement regenerative agricultural techniques. And then the industrial zone, which is where you have the factories and where you transform the product. So, and the whole process of a landscape restoration initiative, it has to run for a minimum of 20 years, one whole generation. So it's not something that you do in 4 years like many projects. It's an initiative, and it's a process that it would last a minimum of 20 years. In reality, it would last for life. So 4 returns, 3 zones, 20 years is the model of common land. I found it super attractive. And they said, would you be willing to help us find an area in Spain? So I had been working on the Iberian lynx for so many years. I had a good network of people I knew over time. So we started looking for projects in Spain. And of course, Spain has a lot of degraded landscapes. So there were a lot of places where we could work. But we ended up choosing this Alvelal region, which is the southeast of Spain. It's a high plain, like the high plains in Peru and Bolivia, but you never think of Spain as a steppe high plain. But we have this area that occupies 1 million hectares, 2.6 million acres of land, of very degraded habitat, where it seemed like a perfect place to implement this common land model of the 4 returns. And one of the major business cases that we found were almonds. It's the largest area in the world for rain-fed almonds. So we never think about almonds. What does it take to cultivate almonds? Most of them are irrigated and they deplete a lot of the water table. But rain-fed are a different thing. And so they get fed by the rain and they don't consume so much water, but they are more nutritious because they conserve more nutrients because they are less washed out. So there's 100,000 hectares of rain-fed almonds in that area. And we thought, okay, we have a business case that we could turn 50,000 hectares were already in ecological, so without pesticides. So it was an easier step to go from ecological to regenerative. So that's why we started there. But the main thing was the quality of the people. People were amazing.
That's great. That maybe made easier the first return of inspiration and hope, right? Working with people that are great and that are open to receiving this project. I was going to ask one question: Why is this area so degraded? So to understand kind of the processes that led us here.
Yes. Well, it's the south of Spain is becoming desertified. I mean, the big part of the world and the Mediterranean basin. But of course, the south is the first to get hit in Europe. And we go to Africa even more. But so it's degraded because of the way we've done agriculture in the industrial agriculture in the past. There's a lot of monoculture and incredible soil degradation. At the same time, a lot of young people don't stay there. They just go to study to the capitals, to the big cities, and then they don't come back because so little by little there's rural abandonment, soil degradation, and then lack of water and contamination of the water table. So there's a lot of different things hammering the area, but the potential is huge to restore, and we are seeing that with what's happening with the Alvelal movement.
And before we get kind of on the results and what you have been kind of the impact you've seen in Alvelal, how do you measure hope? How do you measure that first return? Because we are having so many conversations on how you measure like soil health or even biodiversity. The social, it's kind of difficult sometimes, but hope, how do you measure hope and inspiration? What are the results that you're looking at?
Yes, you need a sociologist for that. And we, to be honest, we are not really measuring it properly. I think more could be done. The same with biodiversity. I think we need to up our level of how we measure the return on biodiversity. But a lot has to do with how many people joins the movement. No, that actually is hopeful, and then also about the involvement of. Not only the grassroots level, the farmers, but the involvement of politicians that see that, okay, we need to change. I mean, I think the main thing about what happened in Alvelal at the beginning, the farmers were saying, see, what's there for my pocket? How am I going to benefit from this for return? This is kind of these foreigners coming here to tell us what to do. We're tired of people telling us what to do. It's like, so the first thing there was to listen to people. I think we spent the first 6 months just sitting and really deeply listening to what were the needs. And that creates trust. And that's, before hope, there's trust. How do you build trust is about that. I think a lot is about building trust between each other. I mean, and also the hope has to do with feeling that you're not alone. A lot of these farmers thought, I really wanted to implement these practices and my grandpa told me this and that, and suddenly you see that there are other farmers wanting the same things, and that is inspirational, and it creates hope for the future. How do you measure hope is we're not doing it properly, but it should be done. And I think we should put inspiration, which has to do with hope, at the center of things that we are doing. It's not just by default. We need to do things that inspire others, like celebrating. Celebration is a huge thing. Having a big party, like the Regeneration Festival that we have, that gives, makes people feel proud about what they have. A lot of these areas, there's one of the big problems is lack of self-esteem. In these degraded landscapes, people think, this just looks terrible and, nobody cares about us and what we do. So just to make things that make people proud of who they are, that root their identity, that is essential. And regeneration and regenerating soils, water, to see a regenerated landscape really gives a lot of hope for the future. And roots your identity, makes you feel proud of what you're doing and what your neighbors are doing. So that's something that we should promote in all these areas where we do agriculture.
And what's really cool about the Alvelal project as well is that it is a community, like a group of neighbors, because we hear often that what can sometimes be scary for farmers in the regenerative, or like before they jump into the regenerative transition, is feeling quite alone, or the fact that their neighbors might like criticize or think that they're crazy, or this kind of like being quite isolated. And I think that building community is such a key factor for the regenerative transition, to have like a group of people who are doing it together on their respective farms, and the storytelling that goes with that, right? Yeah. And that leads me to the question, because I also wanted to talk about the 15-minute documentary about Alvelal that you directed, right?
Yeah, the documentary is actually a 55-minute documentary called Head, Hearts and Hands, and it's the story of Alvelal. But since people are in a hurry, we don't have 55 minutes, most of us. So then we decided, okay, what if we do a summary piece, that it's a 15-minute piece that talks about the 4 pillars of how we implement regenerative agriculture in Alvelal, which are restoring soils, harvesting water, economy and biodiversity, and from community work. How do we enhance the community? And then we've also parted those in 1 minute or 30 or 40-second pills. We call them regenerative pills. And how do we restore water? And then there's a little part of the documentary that explains that. And that helps us like with Instagram and to communicate in a more dynamic way. So we've used the documentary in many ways to really communicate different things about regenerative agriculture. The documentary was done by Intermedia Producciones from Seville, and I directed it, but just in reality, we all directed it. You know, a lot of the farmers said, I'd like to talk about this and or that, and it enhances the role of women in the rural world, which has been overseen for a long time. And, you know, I'm such a believer in the power of women to change the world. I think that our energy is much needed in these difficult times, our nurturing energy. Also, many men have nurturing energy and feminine energy, but it's that feminine energy, whether it comes from a man or a woman, that we need to change the world. We need more kindness. We need more attention to little things. So in this documentary, there's some really powerful women like Santiago, who is a sheep herder, or Loli, who's an educator. So one of the things through the documentary is about that, how not only we implement regenerative agriculture, how we need to look at the landscape as a whole. And that makes it easier to think about community, right? Because you're not just an isolated farm. We start as an isolated farm, but they are beacons for other farms. They have a multiplication effect. So at the beginning, like you said, all the neighbors is like, oh my God, look at your soils. That is so dirty. How can you have your farm like that? But a few years down the road, 2 or 3, you see that, wow, it's looking beautiful. You're producing more and you have green cover, and that green cover may give you an extra income. And now you have sheep there. So you start having a system that is integrated with agriculture and farming and ranching, and suddenly the neighbors is like, wow, and you're getting more money for your almonds. So how are you doing it? So they become from really, oof, my goodness, what are you doing, to curiosity, and then to, okay, I'll start implementing some of this. So maybe you have 10 hectares. It's like, I'm going to start with 1, because you don't want to take a big risk to jump into the pool and it turns out that it's empty water. So it's empty of water. So they go slowly, but that's the way it works. And over time, we've been doing this for 10 years. We have more than 560 members in Alvelal and many, many hectares turning into regenerative. It's a slow process. It's not easy. It requires a lot of facilitation of the process of getting together and celebrating the rural world, but basically just to trust that this is a long-term process. Like now we know that we are in the equator, halfway through. And when I say we, so many people, in reality, you know, it's them who are doing it. I'm one of the 500 and something members, but the ones that are really making the change are the local farmers that are really taking the risks and changing the way they do agriculture.
I think this project for me has always been super interesting, because it's true that you've managed to gather so many farmers and to put them in the front line that I think it's sometimes many forget that they are kind of the main part that needs to change, and we need to support them in this change. And if they don't want to do it, there's no possibilities of doing it. But also I think that there's so many partners in this project that have helped them and supported them in facilitating, in kind of having a strategy. Talk to us a bit, Astrid, about these partners that made this happen, because I know that it was Common Land, it was you, there's more people that helping them and guiding them in this process, right?
Yes, there's a lot of investors, even from the north of Europe, from the Netherlands, from the UK. There's been people believing in this, like family foundations that have thought, I want to make a profit in my investment, but I'm not so interested as making a humongous profit as to making a big change that I feel is needed. So a lot of people have invested in things like Alvelal foods. Maybe it's interesting to talk a little bit about the structure of how this landscape restoration, how Alvelal works. It gives technical support to the farmers. So, as you know, regenerative agriculture is not a one size fits all. Some things work for one farmer, some things work for another. So the technical support is that they go to a farm and they say, okay, this is what you can do to restore soils. You can plant, green cover, aromatic. You can do lines of aromatics, etc., etc. And the farmer said, I may start with this little bit, and so you have this technical support and follow up of the farm. Then you have a machinery bank, it's called. So farmers, especially the small farmer, cannot pay for machinery, but they can rent for a little bit different machineries to do regenerative agriculture. So the machinery bank is important, or like a kitchen to transform products. So you have all the legal labels. And then you have the commercial outlet, which is Alvelal Foods, which actually is part of CrowdFarming. Many of the farmers in Alvelal really, really benefit from your work, which I think it's amazing. What you're doing, connecting the farmers with the consumers, is essential. And it's the way we need to go towards the future. So actually, you really help Alvelal in such a wonderful way. And the commercial outlet is essential. How can you get a premium for the product that you're doing, that you're doing such a service to the world with restoring soils and harvesting water? So there's all these different aspects, and little by little, more people believe in that. But at the same time, among partners, okay, there's a lot, like you guys are partners in many ways. Many people are supporting this landscape restoration process. And for 10 years, we've been doing the grassroots part, but at the same time, you need the top-down approach. How do we influence policies? How do we change the system? Because so first we have pressure from below up to the political level, and then we need the political level to put pressure to change policies. And that what we are doing in that regard is a manifesto. It's a manifesto for our regenerative territory. And this is a declaration of intentions about this territory needs to move from extractive to regenerative. And the idea is that this manifesto has to be signed in pleno del ayuntamiento. That means in the municipalities, you need all political parties to sign this manifesto. Once you have enough critical mass of municipalities signing the manifesto, I think we have now 20-something municipalities. Once you have enough, you can go to the central government and say, hey, there's this territory, this is a regenerative territory, and we want to change the policies for soil management and soil restoration or water management. So basically there's a bottom-up approach and then moving to a top-down approach. And at the same time, we create an Iberian network of regenerative territories who is working in Spain and Portugal that are also looking at the landscape to restore the landscape. So we have 6 different areas right now. They have more than 100,000 hectares in transformation, also using regenerative agriculture as a tool. So it's not only about regenerative agriculture, it's how do you use it as a tool to restore big landscapes. For example, Menorca as an island is one of these this network of regenerative territories. So when we look at partners, there's lots. I mean, there's so many, like the Association of Regenerative Agriculture in Spain with Ana Digon, and so it would be a long, long list. And what we need is the more the merrier, because together we are stronger. Like we are together with you, CrowdFarming, we're much stronger that way. So If we want to go far, we have to go together and never compete, always collaborate.
Totally.
Healthy competition is okay, but towards the same goal.
Yeah, we're all moving in the same direction. So we should share knowledge and not reinvent the wheel every time we start. Totally. And you guys were speaking about regeneration a lot before everyone was talking about it. And how did you come to this name, or why did you decide that it was going to be called regenerative agriculture, and this was what you were going to teach the farmers and support the farmers with?
It just happened naturally. In 2013, 2014, it's when we started. It's like the Rodale Institute already was talking about regenerative agriculture in the 1980s, and that was there. It's like not using biocides, restoring soils. It's like, okay, but it was the very farmers that they were saying, my dream is, they were talking about their dreams, and that my dream is, to have aromatic plants and also sheep in our almond trees. And it's like a dehesa, dehesa, the ecosystem. It's like almendresa, like a dehesa of almond trees. It's like, okay, the way to do it is through regenerative agriculture. And the thing is that now the word regenerative agriculture, we don't agree completely. In different countries, they mean different things. I was in a panel of discussion the other day in the UK, and for example, they use biocides on regenerative. And in Spain, we think, no, we cannot kill pollinators because that wouldn't be regenerative. But anyways, the good thing is that we all need to move in the direction of using nature-friendly solutions. We have to really care about our nature, because it's disappearing in front of our eyes. We talk so much about carbon, and it's important, and it's easier to measure, but we're not talking enough about the collapse of biodiversity. It's really, really collapsing. We can see it in front of our eyes with butterflies, for example, which are bioindicators. It's 70% decline in 50 years, and that's showing us that the system at large is really in bad shape. So we need regeneration for that, and we need to understand what we are doing to the whole system. So yeah, there's so many angles to the whole equation.
Yes, and we should talk more also about kind of the consequences of this biodiversity collapse, right? Because sometimes many people think it's sad to see so many butterfly species go, but as you say, this is an indicator of something that it's not only about beauty. It's much more behind that collapse. Yeah.
Totally. I think, for example, 70% of the food we eat is pollinated by pollinators. We need pollinators. Otherwise, our whole food security is going to be in bad shape. 90% of the wildflowers are pollinated by pollinators, and they are so essential to so many other processes of the system. So what we're doing is we're breaking threads of this. Imagine like if it were a web, a spider web, and we're breaking here, and there, and we have no idea what we're doing, but at some time it's going to collapse. And the good thing, and that we need to hold on to, is that we can reverse this. And regenerative agriculture is an avenue to do this. If we start taking care of diversifying our crops, not using so many biocides so we don't kill so many bugs. One thing about that, it's very, very graphical to show what we're doing to the insect world, is to think about not that long ago, we would go on a road trip and we had to stop to clean the windshield. Every now and then, when I was a kid, it was all the time. You have splattered bugs everywhere. Now you can go for miles on end and you don't never have to stop. What has happened there? There are no insects. We've declared war on insects, and we have no idea of the impact that may have in our own well-being in the future. But the good thing is that we can reverse that. And it's not that hard, and it doesn't take that long. So we need to be hopeful that we can, with what you're doing with CrowdFarming, like all the farmers that you have there doing regenerative, it's working towards that end. And we as consumers need to be conscious about what we eat and what we consume, because in the end, it's going to really bite us in the back end.
Yeah.
Now that we are working with farmers kind of on this transition from organic to also regenerative agriculture, I cannot but think about this kind of initial years. You said that after 2 years, other farmers started joining and seeing the kind of the impact and wanted to join the movement. How were like those first years? Were you doubting like, is this going to work or not? Are farmers going to join? Are they going to fall out of the program? Like, how were those initial years of Alvelal?
They were very exciting, and like you're saying, it's like, oh, is this going to work? It doesn't. We don't know, but one thing is that we must have fun in the process. We have to enjoy, because we don't know for how long we'll be there on this planet. So let's just do something that we believe in, and that just put our hearts in it. We did a lot of facilitation at the beginning. So we did workshops using Theory U and other techniques, future search, to really bring people on board and to create a vision. And the vision for Alvelal is like, in 20 years, we want ecology to equalize economy. We want our economy to be based on ecological principles, and we want to be a lighthouse for other projects in Spain and other places. So that is a inspirational vision that moved people into doing things. And one of the agreements is like, okay, let's have a multiplication effect. Each of the farmers that were there are going to try to convince their neighbors of how this is going to be better for everybody. And of course, at the beginning, nobody believes in it. It's like super hard. There's like 4 cats that we say in Spanish doing this. But little by little, it starts gaining traction. And of course, sometimes you are very enthused about it, and sometimes you think, oh my God, it is so big, the mess out there, and the rate of destruction is so much greater than the rate of regeneration and reconstruction, that sometimes you lose a little bit of faith, but then you see that things come back and then you regain it. So yes, I mean, it's ups and downs like we all have, but we have to.
Yeah, that gives us hope, because it's difficult.
Yeah.
Yes, totally.
If it were too easy, it would be suspicious. And I do want to talk about inspiration for action. The question kind of got lost at the beginning there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it and how it came to be? Because I saw the website and I think it's so cool, the sort of like mix between communities, biodiversity, art, and landscape restoration. It's a much more broad space to play with in terms of restoration and regeneration.
So Inspiration for Action is a baby from Alvelal. Like many other babies, we have the Regeneration Academy or the Alliance for Regenerative Education. There's a lot of babies, and I'm one of them. They set up Inspiration for Action to really promote collective creativity. I really believe in the power of art to change things. And I think that when we allow ourselves to be creative, we are not thinking so much with the intellect, we're thinking more with the heart. And so Inspiration for Action is about promoting projects that have to do with collective creativity, not to be an individual artist. It's like we are all artists at heart, and we can promote things where we can express ourselves, whether it's through dance, through theater, through festivals. So one, for example, of the projects that we've been part of as Inspiration for Action is soundscape restoration, and this is with Sound Matters. So they have been recording the sounds of the earth, the sounds of the soil as it becomes restored, and mixing it with kind of electronical beats and making music out of the restoration that you can even dance in festivals, or the documentary Head, Hearts and Hands has some of this music in. So just different ways of looking at the system that gives us hope and fun. I'm a big believer on having fun. And so other things are the Regeneration Festival that I mentioned before. One of the things we do is to build huge sculptures made out of aromatics to feed the pollinators. And we have this project called Regenerating Butterflies, which is with a book that I wrote called La Magia de la Transformación. In English, it's called On a Butterfly's Wing, Lessons from Nature on Embracing Change. All the funding from that book goes into buying aromatics that we plant in community in the shape of a butterfly, but big, like 20 meters by 25 meters. And like for crowd farming, I think a Regenerar is going to do one that is going to be 1.5 hectares, that like 3 acres. Big butterfly, and it's like an island of aromatic plants in beautiful colors, so it changes colors through the seasons, and it feeds pollinators because they are aromatics that feed pollinators. So you are creating something that it's restoring soil because it's fixing it, it's helping biodiversity, it's creating beauty, and it's uniting the community. Because the fun thing is to plant these plants like grandparents and grandchildren. So it's a community project, and maybe when the grandparents are no longer there, the grandchildren can say, I did that with my grandma. So it roots your identity too. So it's this kind of projects that just bring people together, and we restore nature, and we have fun in the process. We sing, we dance, and we enjoy life.
I wish we can go to one of those parties or events soon. They sound like a lot of fun. Yeah.
We should do one with crowd farming, a regeneration festival with all the farmers in crowd farming. And then
that sounds amazing.
Party, find a really degraded area, and in 3 days we restore it, we plant things, and we party big time. So let's think about it. Let's think about doing it.
Sounds beautiful. Yeah, we just had our first gathering of farmers a week ago, and it was a lot of fun. But because we have them across Europe, it's not always easy to bring so many along. But we had around 70 or 80. So it's, finally we got them together. So I think the next one could be a festival. That sounds amazing. Yeah. And talking about the farmers, I would love, Astrid, for you to portray as kind of this farmer you found when you got to, when you decided you were going to do it in the Alvelal area. The kind of what is, I know it's difficult, but because there are so many farmers, I think, but what's kind of the farmer you found and kind of the evolution you've seen across these years in this farmer?
Wow, many is like you said. There are many farmers, and they are so incredible.
How many farmers are part of Alvelal at the moment?
There's 562 members right now, and 84 businesses. And from the 560 some members, the majority are farmers, but some are entrepreneurs. When I arrived, I think I could say several, but 3 farmers that stood really out for me. One is Santiago, that I mentioned before. She's like the goddess Demeter. Demeter. She's like amazing, and she's got so much power, and really, she's a very, very strong woman, and she's mobilized a lot of energy. Cristobal is a humongous pioneer, and his wife Carmen, also amazing farmers transforming the world. They have a business that with ecological products, but it's almost like how do you say? It's like going to the psychologist. People come there to tell them their problems. And so they really attend the human aspect of all the farmers. It's not just about selling products. It's about really listening to others. Alfonso Chico de Guzman, he left, he's part of CrowdFarming. He is the farmer of La Junquera with his wife, Yannick, and they are doing incredible work. So the evolution was from, he studied empresariales. He studied business in Spain and the States. Then he decided he wanted to be a farmer, came back to the south of Spain to a family farm, and he's changing the whole entire system there. They have set up not only the way they do farming, which is incredible, but their vision of restoring a whole river basin, and then they have the Regeneration Academy to form students, the ecosystem restoration camps. So that's Finca La Junquera from Alfonso Chico de Guzman. I've seen it from being basically ruined to an incredible transformation going on. It's like the transformation inside the chrysalis and a beautiful butterfly coming out of it. So yeah, Alfonso Chico de Guzman, who is one of your farmers, and Yannick and the whole group there are incredible. Then there's the family Martinez Raya. The whole family as a whole, they are amazing. The father Paco is one of the ones that when the sons started to change the soils, he couldn't go to the bar anymore because all the other older farmers were saying, "Your kids are so dirty. Look at how they have the soil." So he was almost embarrassed to go to have a wine with a
Sounds
friend.
familiar.
And suddenly it turned all the way around. And that farm, Fran Martinez Raya is the main farmer. He inspired me so much because he's one of the top sports person for extreme sports in Spain. So he would prune his almonds while he was running. He would be training and pruning, and then his family, with all this wonderful agriculture that they do, they make these amazing energy bars. And he's such a sportsman that he would give all his opponents energy bars so they would have energy during the races and all that. It's like, I like my mates and I like my opponents. So he was inspirational from so many points of view. So it's very hard to point at a single farmer there. There are so many. And the story of Alvelal, a real story, no, but the documentary Head, Hearts and Hands actually depicts the stories of some of these farmers, which, by the way, the short documentary, the 15-minute piece, is now being dubbed into English, because one of the problems is that it's in Spanish with subtitles, and that doesn't allow it to move too much. So now we are dubbing it into English so we can reach more people as a tool to convince others that it's possible, that even in the most harsh and degraded landscapes, you can change reality, and it's really possible, and that you can have fun doing it.
And the documentary won already the Green Film Festival award, right? So there is a good response, I guess, to it. Is that a Spanish festival? I actually don't.
No, it's an international, the Green Film Festival, and it was given in Milano, in Italy.
Right. So it wasn't an issue that it was in Spanish?
It's in Spanish with subtitles, with English subtitles. So yeah, it's that was a joyful moment to get that recognition, and the recognition
to celebrate
for the farmers. It was for the farmers' work. It's not only the documentary, but what they managed to do.
And before we close off as well with our two final questions, I wanted to talk a little bit about your book, the one that you mentioned, On a Butterfly's Wing. What made you want to write this book? And also, I think you have like a thing with butterflies. You're like the butterfly queen. How did that happen as well? Like, why butterflies specifically? Because there are so many pollinators.
I know, it's crazy because my thing is carnivores. I like things with fangs. I've always been like lynx and black-footed ferrets, and always, in primates too. So I had no idea about butterflies. But I think it was 2017 that I read in a paper, butterflies are disappearing. And it's like in the last 50 years, 70% of the butterflies have declined worldwide. It's like, wow. So since I was a little child, 70% of the butterflies are gone. It's like, that is horrible. Who wants a world without butterflies? And by then I didn't even realize how important they are as pollinators and how important they are for an ecosystem. But since I like breeding things, I decided I'm going to start learning about butterflies. So I was able to find eggs and to find caterpillars, and started breeding 5 species in the roof terrace of my house. And then at the same time, the next year, I had the kind of sad news that my mom, who was 92, she had been given very few months to live. I said, what can I do that is super special for my mom? It's like, okay, I'm going to breed a bunch of butterflies. And then for Mother's Day, we're going to release them as a family in a whole celebration of life and transformation. So that would require a lot of thinking. It's like, okay, it was the 5th of May. That one is going to be Sunday, Mother's Day. And so anyways, I was lucky that I was able to breed them and take them as chrysalises to Spain, to Malaga, where my mom lived. And then we were going in the, I was really terrified in the plane, saying, my God, if they start popping out here in the plane, what? So finally, I get to my mom's house. No one have emerged from the chrysalis, and that night they start to come out. The next morning, my mom kind of resuscitated. There were like her children and grandchildren were around, and all these butterflies in the house. So she's like, okay. So she came out of the bed. She sat at the table, and she was having some soup. And I said, "Oh, mom, look at these beautiful butterflies. They are from the species Vanessa carduli, the painted ladies, orange, really beautiful." And said, and I put one on her finger, and she's like, "Oh, this is so beautiful." And she shook her finger, and it went right into the plate of soup. It's like, no, it was just dishing it out, fishing it out of the plate, drying it, and whatever. And it didn't die. It was like, it's like, okay, now we'll give it to the birds or the lizards in the garden. And my niece said, "No way, how can you do that?" It's like, "Why not?" It's like, "No, you keep it as a pet, let's just keep it." It's like, okay, I like challenges. So we kept her without a wing, without an antenna. And let's call her Remedios, because she's remedies, because remedies is a Spanish name, because she's going to need a lot of remedies to make it through life. So La Reme, so this is the book is the story of La Reme. It's her autobiography. It's the autobiography as a butterfly that lost a wing when she fell in a plate of soup. And it talks about her whole transformation from egg to caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly. And it's very scientifically based, but it's an autobiography of a butterfly. So it's magic realism. And through it, I try to make comparisons between the transformation of a butterfly and our transformation as humans, how we can learn so much from the butterflies. For example, the caterpillars have to shed their skin 5 times throughout their lifetime. And we need to shed skin and get rid of stuff that is not helpful to us many, many times through our lifetime too. And then in the chrysalises, the whole body liquefies into a soup, the imaginal soup, and then it reorganizes again. So same components and same DNA, but a completely different creature between a caterpillar and a butterfly. And that teaches us about collaboration and cooperation of the imaginal cells. So through the book, there's a part of science, there's a part of natural history of butterflies, there's a part of philosophy of life and self-reflection. What can we learn from the butterflies? There's a part on conservation. What can we do? What's happening to the natural world and this web of life that we are really shaking and we don't know what we're doing? What can we do as common citizens to recover butterflies? And then also it talks about the amazing migration of this species that goes from sub-Saharan Africa and migrates all the way to Norway. It covers 14,000 kilometers a year. You never think of an insect crossing the Sahara, crossing the Mediterranean, and crossing the Alps through this amazing journey. So the book is about that, and all the royalties go to the conservation of butterflies. So it's a mobilization tool to help bring awareness and support for the conservation of butterflies. And we've created, my son and I, the one that was calling a little moment ago, we've just created like 2 weeks ago, an Instagram page to mobilize support for the butterflies through the book. So that's it. On a Butterfly's Wing, Lessons from Nature on Embracing Change. And in Spanish, it's called La Magia de la Transformación, Memorias de una Mariposa No Voladora.
We normally ask for a fact and for a book, but I feel like we've got both after this story.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And CrowdFarming follows the Instagram account. It's very cool what you guys are doing on there as well. So definitely recommend that. And it's so true that I was going to say, we always close off with those 2 questions that I sent to you as well. Like, what's a book that you recommend and what's a fact that's made you think, what the fuck is going on? And I feel like your book is this one, and the fact is the 70% of butterflies have disappeared.
That's how the field is going on. That definitely with that one is like, oh my God. But I would like to recommend a book. It's totally not a page turner, but it has helped me so much in life. And it's called Non-Violent Communication, A Language for Life. And I've used it with my son when he was an adolescent. And it's about how to learn to listen to others, how to learn to speak to others, how to learn to communicate. And it's about empathizing and about not judging. So it's not a page turner, as I said, but it's an amazing tool to help you, to help all of us communicate in groups and at home. So that would be nonviolent communication. But if you want to get on a butterfly's wing, you help us with the movement. So that would be wonderful.
No, but it's beautiful, Astrid, because I think we talked about a lot about inspiration, about hope, about people, and we sometimes forget that it's not only kind of the technical part that we need for this transformation and the scientific part. It's also kind of this behavioral change part and this kind of emotional intelligence part that we need to bring people along the movement. So I will definitely get this book and start reading it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I think what you're doing is amazing and you inspire me a lot. And I think, it really is so wonderful to see women and young women and men too. Women are wonderful also, but just leading this change and you give me a lot of hope. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's so cool. I do think that sometimes this space can get a little bit too serious or scary because we're discussing topics that at the end of the day are quite scary. I mean, we're talking about the complete collapse of biodiversity, complete degradation of our soils. So it's really cool to see examples like a regenerar of people who do it with a fun twist. So, Astrid, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about, so we've been talking about like inspiration and community and everything. How do we get young people involved, not just farmers and not just people who work in this space, but the younger generations to also be involved?
Yes, definitely. It starts by listening. Like every time you have to really listen to what young people want. And this is very important because you want very different things than older people. So we need to adapt to that. What would it make it interesting for a young person to move to the countryside? And I'd like to put the example of the group A Regenerar. They are young influencers who had a vision. We want to be the first influencers on Instagram on regenerative agriculture. At the time, it was the pandemic. They were stuck in Madrid and they really didn't like it. And they said, what if we move to the countryside? So they saw the documentary Head, Hearts and Hands and decided, let's move there and see what happens. And they moved to La Junquera for 2 months. They've been there out now in the area for 4 years. But over time, they've been communicating what is regenerative agriculture, how do people practice it at the day-to-day level, and they've mobilized already almost 30,000 followers. So little by little, they are really reaching out to a whole group that farmers don't have such easy access to. And they are fun. They are about just really doing things in a kind of silly, fun way, but communicating very important facts.
Thank you so much, Astrid, for a wonderful conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so nice to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.